Happy Black History Month. As one of my mentors told me today, Black history is not a month, it's a lifetime. Welcome to the fourth town hall of Many Threads, One Fabric, a partnership between NYSUT and the AFT to provide members with information, experiences, and tools that examine and promote diversity in the Union. My name is Philippe Abraham. I am Secretary Treasurer of NYSUT and an AFT National Vice President. I'm delighted to have with us today Dr. Juana Bordas, author of the book Salsa, Soul, and Spirit, who will speak with us about embracing racial and cultural diversity. I decided to keep the introduction short so that the balance of our time together can be utilized for what I'm sure will be a lively discussion between Juana and a few NYSUT members. Thank you for joining us. Saludos. Juana, to begin our charla, can you please give us a brief overview of your work as an activist and of your book?
That was a brief introduction. Yeah, well, we were just talking that I am very honored to be an elder in my community and very blessed that I've been able to do this work for more than a half a century. And so what I want to say is that at this point in my career, I'm really working on trying to till the soil, to cultivate our society for what I believe is going to be a new age. The name of my book is Leadership for a Multicultural Age. And so we stand on the precipice of a transformation that's going to take place in our society. And it has to do with our demographic shifts. It has to do with the fact that the millennials and the Zs are the biggest generation that have ever lived, and they're going to bring a paradigm shift. It has to do with our consciousness about globalism now, particularly with COVID, and how we can see that there really are no borders, right? And it has to do with the fact that technology, look how it's connecting us and bringing us together across boundaries. And so this force for the multicultural evolution of humanity, which I see as our next step as a human race, is something that is going to be happening in this century. And we know that by the middle of this century, we will no longer have a dominant culture. And so multiculturalism is on the other side of that. You have to realize that the dominant culture was pretty monolithic. You know, it was pretty much, you know, the melting pot, that we're the same, that we conform. You know, it wasn't this idea of celebrating differences. In fact, even Anglos were asked to come and change their name and forget where they come from and to cut their roots when they immigrated to this country. Multiculturalism is a totally different approach. It believes that the philosophy, the values, the history, the practices, the influences, the assets and gifts of every different group are something that are going to contribute to a beautiful tapestry of humanity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, about an asset-based approach to diversity, where we're looking at it as one of the most positive things that we can contribute to. What's really important in this type of approach is, first of all, is to encourage and kind of cultivate all different people to participate. And that, in my book, I call doing work, the leader as equal, or having that sense that every single person deserves respect. Every single person has something to contribute. And every single person has some sort of a leader within themselves. And that our job as teachers, as educators, as nurses, medical professionals, is to help bring that out in our people. What is it that makes them unique, and what is their unique contribution to make? The other thing about equality is that in the dominant culture, it's always about hierarchy, and we call it the dominant culture because there's this idea of exclusion and standardization. Whereas in the multicultural world, every person is equal. So you can be the leader, Felipe can be the leader of an organization, or you all can have specialized roles. But the way you treat other people is with total respect. There's a saying in Spanish, en cada cabeza hay un mundo. In every head, there's a whole world. So whether you're teaching or developing staff or whatever you're doing, how do you get to know people in a way that you know what's in their world, so that you can really work with them and develop them so that they reach their own potential, but more important, that they make a contribution. Because this shift that we're going through, this paradigm change, is going to take the best efforts of all of us. So in the dominant culture, the leader has influence, power, status, makes a lot of money, maybe is even the CEO of a big company. That's here. But what we're saying is that in the multicultural age, we might still have positions, but every single person, whether they're the ones that clean your buildings or keep track of what's going on and with special events, or deal with the parents in your schools, that every single person has a key role to play. The second thing about multiculturalism that shifts the way we work with people is that there's a thing called the leader as the guardian of public values. In other words, if we're going to have a multicultural society, what we really need to do is to create what Martin Luther King called the beloved community, or a community that takes care of its people. Now, the tradition, the history of the United States, the reason we've been able to come so far is that, yes, we believe that. We believe that our society should be focused on the common good, that there's justice and equality for people, that that prosperity is an important thing, that community, that we value community, that democracy and giving people access is a value we have. So as a nation, we have these values, right? Which have been called a promissory note, which have been called, this is what the vision of America is. And in a true multicultural society, what our job is to make sure that these values become the values that guide our organizations and that guide our nation. So that for education, you have equal access. You don't have some people going to very expensive colleges because their parents can afford that, and other kids having to work or not being able to go to college because they have to provide for their family. You have the idea of the common good, where we don't have the 1% taking more than their share, because again, that's dominance, that's exclusion. What we have is we have the common good, a safety net for people, so that everybody has the ability to contribute, right? We don't have 60,000 homeless in Los Angeles. It's the whole idea of public values. And I think if you look back, communities of color, we have only gotten to where we are because of the relentless activism of our leaders. I mean, how is it that 500 years later, we are where we are, right? How is it that some of us are now educated, that some of us are able to provide for our families in a good way, that we have people in leadership positions, that we've just elected a Congress that has more women and people of color than ever before? Why? Because we kept pushing the needle for 500 years, whether it was overcoming slavery or colonization or women who were excluded even from voting. So this whole idea of leadership and multiculturalism being for the common good is a shift that we need to make in society. And the third one that I wanted to explore is the idea of servant leader, and we'll get that into that a little bit more. But the whole idea that we are stewards, that leadership is not about privilege, it's not about me, it's about we. And so that paradigm shift that we have to go through to restructure our society from a individualistic meritocracy, where I succeed because of my own efforts, which we know is not true, to a society that is based on the we. And the fortunate thing for all of us is that women come from we societies where they believe in the family and in education. They did the churches, the nonprofits. Women wove the fabric of society. It's true for communities of color in the United States. Blacks, Latinos, American Indians, Asians are we. But the truth is that the only culture that was based on individualism, on getting yourself up by your own bootstraps, which I did it myself, was the Western culture that came to this hemisphere. And we all know that that's not true, that we have been nurtured and cared for and guided, not only by our own families, but by a society, an educational system, churches, coaches. We have all been nurtured who we are. And so that sense of we is an important shift that we need to make if we're going to really build the multicultural society and really look at inclusion as something that we embrace for everybody. The other important thing that we were talking about is that this is Black History Month, and the reason we have Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month and Women's Her Story Month and the LGBTQ month, etc., is because we were left out of the history books, but not just left out of the history books, but the contribution that we made to this country was left out. And so how can we build a multicultural society if we don't acknowledge the contributions, the history, the assets of everybody who built this nation? So again, it's almost a lie, you know what I mean? It's almost like negating the fact of what all of us have done to create our society. And the only way we can shift this and make this change is to start embracing that. And so this is a great month for people to embrace the African-American experience in the United States and to understand the vibrancy that this community has given us in our society. So we need to change our history. And in my book, I call that Sankofa. And I think that's such an important term because it comes from East Africa. And Sankofa is a bird with an egg in its mouth, symbolizing the future, symbolizing growth, symbolizing we're going somewhere. But he's looking back and saying, retrieve the past, learn from the past, remember the past, integrate the past. That's how we become a strong nation. And so that's important. The Idawi, the Sankofa, and the third one, which I think is so important. And, I feel like I am really rich. I don't know how you all feel, but I live in the best house I've ever lived in, right? From where I came from, man, I'm sitting on Easy Street, right? So I feel very rich. I don't need to take more than my share. That's an important thing. All of you are comfortable, but you're not taking more than your share. And so in communities of color, in we cultures, it was always recognized that if I took more, it hinders you. Those that take more, they hurt that social fabric, that net that we have to have. And so I always say that the Latino culture has a great one for this, mi casa su casa, which means what I have is yours, really. It means sharing, generosity is more important than accumulation. And we're not saying we can't be comfortable. All of us are okay. It's that we cannot have this division, and we cannot have a society based on materialism, on acquisition and accumulation. That is not good for the human spirit, right? Because it's always more, it's always looking for something else. The human spirit, when it's grateful, when we feel like we have enough, that's when we can really enjoy our lives and really feel like I guess the word is nourished. I feel nourished because I know that I will be provided for. And so these three shifts, so I call that gracias or generosity or mi casa su casa, but we have to shift from materialism to sharing, generosity, everybody having enough. We have to switch from the I to the we, to that sense of we are a collective. Human beings thrived because we belong to tribes, because we're social people. And how do we make that switch? And then the third one is to embrace our history and to learn from the beautiful cultures that have made this nation great. And so that's a little bit of how we switch into a multicultural paradigm. And I do want to say that instead of the melting pot, I use the analogy of a beautiful salad with all different kinds of ingredients, where every ingredient, whether it's the tomato or the carrot or the lettuce, keeps its integrity as you bring it forward. The other one that I love is paella. For those of you who have ever had paella, it's one of the greatest dishes, where you bring all these ingredients together and each ingredient stands alone, but bringing it together enhances the whole. So we don't want no melting pot. We want to know who we are. We want to know where we came from. We want to be able to share that with others. And we want to create an incredible new society that's a kaleidoscope of all of us and that brings the best that each has to offer into the mainstream. So that's my 15 minutes. I was told I had 15 minutes.
Muchísimas gracias. That was fantastic. That was wonderful. That was excellent. And you kept the time as well. Now, as you know, we have a few invited members of NYSUT who will be asking you a few questions. And so I'm going to begin with my hermana, Samantha. Sam?
Thank you, Dr. Bordas. That was wonderful. I so thoroughly enjoy hearing you talking about the book and these very real humanistic concepts that touch the soul. You know,
exactly. Yeah.
So
you put that really well, Samantha, because we have to change from materialism to humanism, from the dollar to the person, to the individual.
That's right.
Right.
So if you were in a position to change the way multiculturalism is perceived in the workplace, what actions would you take?
Well, you know, I was talking a little bit about an asset-based approach to diversity, which is another switch we have to make because of the racist society that has been structured where, you know, people were not seen in that way. They were marginalized and called minorities, you know, so that alone tells you. So when I look at, for example, let's start with African Americans since it's Black History Month. We can learn so much from the African American experience, right? The idea that soul, you know, Martin Luther King said, we have come to save the soul of America. That soul, that essence, that spirit that Native Americans value so much, that we need to bring that into our work. You know, we are not just material beings, but we have a spirit and a soul. And so here you take African Americans who were denied a soul. You know, they were told that they were 3/5 of a person. And leadership is about transformation. Diversity is really about transformation and growth. So now we have a people who were denied their soul, who bring soul into their music, into their food, into their politics, into making the church the dominant institution. Well, isn't that a lesson for all of us? That there's something more in life than, say, materialism or even achievement, personal achievement. Or you can take Native Americans, and one of the major things I learned from my Native American brothers and sisters is that you have to have vision and that you have to listen to prophecy and dreams, you know? And so your middle school kids would be sent down on a vision quest to answer the question, who am I? How am I unique? What is my contribution to make? You know, that idea of knowing yourself, you know, because each one of us is unique. That's why diversity is so beautiful, because God never makes anything twice. Each one of us are a one-of-a-kind design. This is it, baby. This is it. There'll never be another Samantha or Felipe, right? So in any case, that whole idea of spirit in the Native American community where they send you out on your vision quest to answer the question, who am I? So isn't that important in an organization to know your people, who they are? You know, every leadership program that I start, I have people bring the oldest picture of their family to say, who am I? Where did I come from? What did my family teach me? And that's so important in an organization. There's 6 of us on the screen now. One generation ago, we would have known our grandparents. We would have been in intact communities. We would have had roots together. We don't have that anymore. So one of the roles of the leader, or one of the roles of someone in an organization, is to make sure we know who we are, that we know our stories, that we know our backgrounds, that we know our values. And that makes it really easy then to manage people and bring them together to work together because they know who you are. Right? So it's that bonding and that relationship that's so important. And so again, as we look at different cultures and what they bring, the Latino culture, for example, I'll throw this one out. We are a hell of a lot of fun. Latinos over-index. They spend more money on music, going out to eat, fiestas. Think of us, color, music, salsa. We believe that you have to enjoy life, right? And I call it gozar la vida. And so think about organizations where people celebrate life, you know, where they have that energy, that fun, that idea that together we make this happen. And so again, if you're working with an organization, to be able to tap into the beautiful talents and assets of all of your people, and particularly different ethnic groups and cultures and different ages, right? Different ages. You know, I like hanging around with young people because they're so excited about the future and they're ready to do different things. Whereas a lot of older people have shut down a lot of that, you know, whereas I want new experiences. So I love young people around. So everybody in your organization really has a contribution to make. But as the leader, I need to create the environment where they can happen. And I need to respect everyone so that I model the way on how to do it.
Thank you very much.
Hello, I am Pre Christian Kennedy, and I'm so grateful to be here with you. Inspiring is saying too little. For sure, things that you've said already just kind of resonate in my mind in terms of me growing up and been told for so long that I needed to adopt to the dominant culture. Even my name, I don't know if you know Indian names, but it's misspelled. And it's misspelled because a nurse in the hospital where I was born said Raya, and they didn't know how to speak, say Indian names. So I've been left with the scar for a very, very long time. My question is about current events. The disparities exposed by COVID-19, the 3 words, I can't breathe, and the recent deadly riots at the US Capitol remind us of how polarized our nation really is around race. What strategies do you suggest for leaders and union members to use when addressing race, especially when for those who are accused of placing too much emphasis on race?
Well, first of all, I want to tell you that you have the liberty to change your name back. Muhammad Ali, right? He changed his name because he changed. And in American Indian tradition, anytime you go through a transformation, you can change your name. Because you have a new name, you have a new being, every 7 years, every cell in your body changes. So let's change your name and get it right. Anyway, when people say that this is too much, and there was a period there, I don't know, for those of you that are women, the women's movement started in the 60s, and then in the 90s, there was this huge backlash and the women had to go back in and we're having a little bit of that now, that backlash against race. But I say, oh, really? Oh, really? When you have Black Lives Matter, right? When you have COVID, actually, you can see what's happening with Hispanics and Blacks and American Indians with COVID and old people. Now we have old people that we have to really protect. And so, I would love to change this discussion and get down to work at building the multicultural nation, but we can't until we really look at the institutional racism in our society, right? Now, I'm really sorry if some people take offense to it, but, that's not my issue in a sense. But I do want to say this before we get into that. I think each one of us, first of all, has to do our own work because, like you said, you have a scar because somebody wouldn't even give you your name, and name is essence, name is identity, name is where I came from, name is my heritage, right? So from one spot soup that was taken from you. And so you have to go back and heal that in some way. And I know it's not healed because you just told me about it. You see what I mean? So we have to go back and do our own work. I had such an inferiority complex when I was growing up, right? Now they call it sometimes the Imposters Syndrome because I was trying to make do, trying to make it. But think about it. Each one of us mastered the dominant culture. That's why we're here. We're not asking them to do anything different than I did at 6 years old when I walked into school and couldn't speak English. We're not asking them to do anything different. When I went to college and had to borrow clothes and cook my food in the lunch in the room because I didn't have enough money for food, we're not asking them to do anything that we haven't experienced ourselves. And the good news is that because we did this, because we mastered the dominant culture system, and because we can now work in it and then change it, it's a value added again. White people, if they only, I mean, we have a thing in the Latino community called Latino by corazón, Latinos by heart. Why? Because everybody who either marries into my family or hangs out with us long enough wants to be Latino. Right? So we say you can be Latino by corazón, by heart, by following our values, by being part of the family, by contributing, by being a good citizen, by doing the things that are going to advance our people and our community. That's what it means to be Latino. So if you want to join up, join us, right? Join us. And so we have to have that open sense. So the first thing is to get rid of the things that are painful, to heal ourselves, because you can't go into nonviolence and into this kind of work if you're still too angry. Although I do have to say something about that. The second one is to know your role. I mean, at this point in my life, nobody pays my bills. I mean, I own my home. I have Social Security. I'm going to say whatever the hell I want. However, when you're younger or you have a boss or the superintendent's white or whatever, you know, we know the other good thing about people of color and people that have learned how to culturally adapt, another positive is we know how to maneuver. You know, I can walk in a room and know what language to use. Do you pull out the PhD or are you gente? In other words, are you people? Are you real? So, so we have to know our role. So at this point in my life, I have chosen to be an activist. I have chosen to do that by teaching and by writing and by being able to speak my truth, because I'm at a place in my life where I can do that. I want you to think about, you know, the great prophet, Martin Luther King. He always had, you know, Jesse Jackson and John Lewis and Andrew Jackson and Ralph Abernathy, different people who played different roles. Ralph Abernathy went on to build the organization. Jesse Jackson was the activist, you know, saying, hey, we got to do something about this, right? Then you have Andrew Young, not Andrew Jackson, Andrew Young, who was the great statesman, right? Even internationally, he was recognized. And then you have John Lewis, who was the consciousness and the spirit of the movement. And so each one of us has a different role to play. And that's why knowing yourself and your own uniqueness and why you're here, that vision quest that Native Americans tell you to go on, is so important, so that you know what your role to play is. You may be the peacemaker. You may be the one that's okay being in a meeting with all Anglos. You know, I went through that in my 30s and 40s. I don't want to be a token. I don't want to be the only one speaking out. You know, and so each one of you, but I respect the people that can do that can move the needle a little bit more, that know how to operate in different systems. And so that deep respect that each one of us has a role to play. And again, this is critical mass theory. This is if we can get enough people on board with this, especially with the young wave that's coming, we can make this transition in your lifetime, right? It'll be the middle of the century. We can make this transition. But the important thing is for us to be very conscious of what that means. What kind of a society do we want to build? Well, you know, what do we really want to have for our children? It is one of the biggest pains in my heart that I had a mother who scrubbed floors in the school lunchroom, who served food, who on Sundays would get up at 5 o'clock and go take care of children until 2 in the afternoon at the church, so that I could become educated, so that her children could have a better life. That's the essence of leadership. The idea that we're here to make, first of all, to evolve the species, right? To evolve. But second of all, to make sure that the next generation has it better. It is the biggest pain in my heart that this system has not only created the homeless, which I never saw a homeless person till I was in my 30s. but it has not put our children first. And in any communities, in any group that is concerned about survival, their legacy is what is best for the next generation. Many of you might know the Iroquois' great law of leadership. It's like, in every deliberation, the great leader considers his or her action and the impact on their children, their children's children, their children's children's children, and unto 7 generations. And that was the great law of leadership.
If I can ask a question,
Sure.
you really brought up a great point. But first, I just want to thank you so much for attending. And your book, as a history teacher and as a union activist, really hit on so many levels. And you just segued into leadership, and you talk in your book a lot about being a servant leader. And I think at this point in our nation's history, we have a crisis in leadership. I think we're seeing that on a lot of levels. Can you say a little bit more about what it means to be a servant leader and how this vision what it could mean for our country? I think that's so important at this.
Yes, it really is. You know, a lot of, when I started studying leadership, the way I got into writing about leadership, and this is really good for all of you, okay? All right. I was 50. So you got more careers coming. Don't even think you don't. So I go into the leadership field, and I'm running an organization called the National Hispana Leadership Institute. It's the first institute for Latino women to prepare themselves for higher level leadership in our country. And over 800 women went through the program in the 30 years that it existed. But here's the thing, there was no work on how communities of color led, right? I mean, so obviously we talked about the fact that we all got here, didn't we? And we got here because of our families, our communities, our people, the relentless. And in the Latino worldview, it's called paso a paso, step by step. Incrementally change happens. And so as we all contribute, that begins to move forward. So that's how I got started into looking at leadership in communities of color, because I thought we've got to have very, not only distinguished ways of leading, but think about this, you can't pay the people. All of this evolution that took place for centuries, you had to motivate them. It wouldn't happen in your lifetime. My vision will not happen in my lifetime. How would you like to get people motivated to work for something where they don't even get to see the results in their lifetime? Think about the idea of scarcity. We didn't have much, but we pulled it together so that we could move forward collectively. Whether it was putting the money together so one person could go get educated, right? Or whether it was saving the money so somebody could have a down payment for a house. You know, we did it collectively. And so that whole idea of us working together to achieve those goals obviously is a very refined form of leadership, right? It's a very refined form of leadership. And so what the leader is equal is really the foundation for servant leadership, because it levels the playing field. Remember, we got to keep talking about dominance, hierarchy, and patriarchy. Anything that brings it this way, right? The leader is equal, respecting all peoples, making sure everybody has a contribution, seeing how you can develop people, making sure that people feel part of the group and part of the community and part of the organization. That is leveling the playing field. And that's the first job of the leader, because then you can have what I term leadership by the many. That's all of us having a little part to play, leadership by the many. And so that's very important when you look at it, because again, the way we made it was through a civil rights model, through an activist model, through a community organizing model. And those models are really good for engaging people. So when you look at the servant leader, the main thing, and people in communities of color don't like the word servant leader, and I wish we could think of another term. I call it community steward. That's the term I finally came up with, that we're not just servant leaders, we're community stewards. We're we're taking care of our communities and our organization and our people and our kids. So it's more a collective thing. So the first thing about servant leadership that's so important is that it has to be based on the needs of the people you serve. So how do you know that? How do you know what your kids need, or what your staff needs, or what the people in the hospital need, or you have to ask them. So one of the key things in a servant leader is listening. And it's such a strange thing to say that listening is one of the top leadership skills. But you take somebody like Martin Luther King, he would come in, he would pray, he would state the issue, and then he wouldn't say anything until everybody shared. John Ecclehart, the great Pawnee leader, the one who helped form, what is it when the Indians get their reservations? You know the word? Tribal sovereignty. Thank you, Lord. Tribal sovereignty. They're the ones who brought that, because he was one of the first Native American Indians. He says white people aren't always very comfortable with his leadership style, because when he comes into a meeting, he wants to feel the atmosphere. He wants to know what's going on. He wants to listen to people. So he sits back and he weaves it and then he speaks, right? So listening, because you got to know the needs of your people. Servant leaders base everything they do on the highest priority needs of their people. But the second thing is that it's an empowerment model. When you hear servant leader, you think maybe codependency or doing for others. No, it's about helping people be autonomous, helping people be more engaged, helping people understand that they can do something to solve their own issues, or that they understand things well enough to be able to engage. And so again, it's about creating that environment where people feel respected, valued, cared for, listened to, and asked to contribute. And so a servant leader is very much, not in the background, but always figuring out what is it I can do to help people develop, empower, and move forward and become autonomous and then serve themselves.
Absolutely. Do you see, I know you said this is definitely not something, we may see in our lifetime. We're growing the tree that we'll never sit under. But do you see it progressing in our nation? I know the demographics are changing, and that gives us hope toward a more multicultural society. Do you see shifting, because we live in such a hierarchical society?
Yeah.
In the United States?
Well, when I was a feminist in the early part of the feminist movement, our motto was, we have to outlive them. Because women do live longer than men, right? We got to outlive these people. And that's why, by the way, I talked a little bit about healing yourself, but another really important thing is to take care of yourself, because the lifespan doubled in the last century. So we're living a lot longer. And, and again, in many communities, the elder is respected. So how do we keep ourselves motivated, healthy, able to contribute, as we go through life, as we journey through life, because that's so important. I have a mentor, Frances Hesselbein, that some of you might know. She headed up the Girl Scouts in the 90s. She's 105 and she's still writing. And James McGregor Burns, the great theorist who wrote the book Leadership, who coined socially responsible leadership. By the way, that didn't happen until the 70s. Leadership was not seen in this light until Robert Greenleaf wrote The Servant Leader and James McGregor Burns wrote Leadership. And the important lesson there is that these are white males. So when you're talking about allies, when you're talking about people who are going to walk beside you, it's not about color, it's not about race, ethnicity, age, it's about consciousnness. Do they really care and want to uplift humanity and to make sure that everybody has a place in the garden? So both of them made this shift, because James McGregor Burns said leadership is about the social good. And when I taught at the Center for Creative Leadership, I had a bunch of kids from, I call them kids, but they had MBAs. And they were from Frito-Lay. And they were there so they could get 5% more of the potato chip market. That's about when I left, but I did learn a lot about leadership. That's the good part. What's the purpose of leadership? See, that's the question. What is the purpose of leadership in our society? And, we talked about it. The purpose of leadership is to create the society that values the public good, that infuses our highest values of democracy and justice and equality into the mainstream, into the fabric of the society. The purpose of leadership. And I actually wanted to share with you this definition by LaDonna Harris, the great Comanche, because she said that the purpose of leadership was to share all the work that needed to be done in the tribe or in the community for the benefit of the common welfare. So the purpose of leadership has to be the common welfare, right? That's why I serve. That's why I become a leader, to elevate the human species. Now, are we getting there? I think what you're doing here is what gets us there. Because it has to be a conscious decision. Even servant leaders, Robert Greenleaf said, for you to become a servant leader has to be a conscious decision. You have to say, I want to serve. You have to say, I have a vision for a better society. You have to say to the kids, hold on, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. And so you have this driving you. I'm an optimist. I believe, but again, we have to educate our youth. We have to let them know why civic engagement is so important. We have to let them know it may not happen in your lifetime. Because if somebody would have told me that when I was marching for civil rights, I wouldn't have believed them. We have to give them that perspective. And so I think we have that with our young people today. I think people, this whole shift, we don't want to lose the energy that has come from Black Lives Matter and this new emphasis on diversity and inclusion, to the point where our president is now saying we've got to see it, coming down in all different institutions. So we're here to light that fire, to keep the fire burning, and to remember, paso a paso, step by step, we get there. I see the change coming. You guys see the change coming? You see the change coming? And we're part of it, right? We see the change coming. And so, look at the screen. We're women, we're people of color, we're different ages, we're dedicated to our youth, we're dedicated to education, we're dedicated, to having people have a good wage, having good benefits. We're doing the good work. Right. And so we have to keep pushing that forward and keep thinking of yourself as one of the elevated people that are part of this movement.
Dr. Bordas, how you doing? First of all, just thank you for everything. Thank you for being here. Your book was wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Wayne.
I had a question that I wanted to ask you, and you answered it within the first 5 minutes of speaking. So I had to go to my other questions. But when you were speaking, you were talking about embracing leadership from the past in terms of icons like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others. And this was during a time period where social media didn't exist, where individuals weren't scrutinized as they are today.
Yes.
So when we look at this new age of social media, we see that many people have shared some items that may have been embarrassing to them on social media and whatnot. And in your book, you mentioned setting an inspiring example. So as we are intersecting generations, how would you tell potential leaders how to deal with things that they may be embarrassed of as an individual to move forward as a multicultural leader in a sense of we, when they may have walked the walk a little bit differently in the past? Generation.
Yeah, that is such a great question. I used to kid people. I used to say, well, I'm just going to become a born again Christian and all my sins will be forgiven me. That's what I used to say. Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because the leader is equal is based on the character of the leader. The old walk your talk stuff. It is based on the character of the leader. People are going to follow you because they believe in you and because you set that example of how to be a leader. Now, the thing about public values, and I must say, for those of you who have never read Jim Joseph's work, he was voted one of the top 100 African-American thinkers in the last century. You know, he's saying that public values is about public values, not about individual values. It's not about who you live with or whether you decide to have 4 kids instead of 3. It's not, it's about public values. Are you doing what you need to do to be an upstanding citizen in this society? And, are you contributing to the benefit of the whole? So it's very different in that way, because as you know, in the dominant culture, it's that individual leader and what they've done in their life and et cetera, et cetera. And there's a historical content. Now, people may not agree with me about this, but what happened in the 1950s is not okay today. But in a historical context, we have to allow people to have lived their reality, right? Now, forgiveness. My book ends with the idea of forgiveness, of reconciliation that we learned so much from our South African brothers and sisters. There has to be that sense of forgiveness. And the other thing is that people of color have only survived and thrived because of their deep religious faith, their belief, right? That they would be taken care of, their belief that the future would be better. That's an incredible gift, by the way, that we give to our country. That deep spiritual root that has kept all of us moving. I personally believe that there is forgiveness and that there is redemption. But it depends on, is this person walking the talk now? Because a lot of us, I think one of the best examples, and excuse me if this offends anyone, but is the marijuana issue, which was a traditional medicinal herb in the indigenous communities that I come from. And that was then made illegal. And you need to look at all of the history on that, because it was about DuPont and cotton and the fact that hemp was stronger than cotton. There's a whole history. And then so many people of color were put in jail for drugs, that and other drugs. Well, you may have that in your background, but guess what? That is not an offense against the common good. Do you understand what I mean? Because that was a huge thing when I was growing up. When I went to college, people did smoke, and then we had to have different people like Obama. He made a joke about the last time he was this insightful, he was in college. So, is that a sin? No, it's not a sin. So let us, not throw the first stone. But if they continue, if this is something where there's still racism, where there's still white supremacy, where there's still miscegenation, where there's still, this thing against women, where women can't be what they, reach their own potential, that we have to call people on. But the past, if it's reconciled and if they've changed their ways, or if it was not an offense today, I think we have to let that go. But there's always confession. After the session, you can call me. I'll hear your confession and resolve you of your sins.
It's good for the soul.
Good for the soul.
So I'm going to open it up to any follow-up questions. Or Dora?
I have a question. There's a part in your book that just hit me, and it's when you talk about cyclical reciprocity. And you put in your book saying giving is to dish out for oneself, which I loved.
Yeah.
But then you also go on to say that the community fiber is broken if someone takes out more than someone takes more out of the expense of others. And it speaks not only to leadership, but to economic systems.
Yes.
All I can think of is and this will be dating myself, is the 80s movie where Gordon Gekko says greed is good, and
right.
Just this capitalistic system that our nation's based on. And I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more to that, because it just sounds so revolutionary.
Yeah, well, I don't think our nation was based on that. If you ever got a chance to watch Mad Men or Madison Avenue and how this happened, I don't remember as a child, and of course I, grew up in the 40s and 50s, having that sense of having to have more all the time. It has come about through marketing, and even when we watch TV, when I was a child, we have one advertising. Now there's like 6, 7, 8. So the capitalist system creates need that isn't authentic. It's having to have more, having to have new, having to have planned obsolescence, of stuff. So I wouldn't say that it's part of our history and our culture. In fact, I think it's taking us in the wrong direction. Capitalism is not democracy. And right. And so we have to look at our economic system separate from our political system. And, this was really taught to me by Native Americans in a very deep way, because, they did own the land communally, and on reservations, if they sell things or have a profit or have land that they use, it's divided in among the tribe. It doesn't mean, like I said earlier, that we can't be comfortable, but it's this gap between the haves and the have-nots that's causing the problem. It's, and it's something that we really do have to tackle. When I say reciprocal generosity, it means that it's okay for me to give to you because I know someone else will give to me, or you'll give to me at a later time. And so it becomes much more fluid. In the old days, if you said you liked my sweater, I had to give it to you. But then somebody would see I needed a sweater and they would bring me a sweater, right? I mean, it's kind of that idea. And it's really, it's very generous as well, that people give you things and recognize you, and it extends with the leader, not just to material things, but being very affirming of people. Recognizing their good traits, spending time with them, sending them a note if something happens to them, calling them up if they're sick or if they've lost someone. It's a generosity of spirit, a generosity of heart. And it has to do with us knowing that it's that we belong together, and that we have survived and thrived because all of us took care of each other.
Thank you.
Dr. Bordas, just want to add, since we're all educators here,
Yes.
in terms of shifting from materialism to the collective I to we and embracing our history, what advice would you give educators out there listening now on recommendations on how to teach our students in this new multicultural age to make them leaders? And I'm talking about educators from all aspects, whether white, non-white. What would you recommend them to do in order to educate this new generation of leaders?
Well, the first thing I would start with is myself. When I do a presentation with slides and stuff, I show pictures of myself. In fact, I keep it right here so you all can see it. This is my family when we immigrated here. Can you see that? And that's me, the little girl, my mother with 6 of her 8 children as we're about to get on a banana boat to come to the United States. My mother with a 5th grade education. I grew up poor. I grew up in the barrio. I grew up a girl, which was, trust me, 40s and 50s being a girl. I didn't speak the language. Kids need to know that about me, because they see this vieja, they see this lady here, or they see Felipe with his degree, or Dora. They can't identify with you. So the first thing to do is to tell kids who you are. What's your family? What's your background? What made you successful? What are 2 or 3 tips? Not to download it all on them, but they need to know who you are so they can connect with you, so they can identify with you, so they can say, me too, I can do that. And so that's really important. I do want to share, because you are educators, a little bit about the dream my mother had. So here, as I said, is this immigrant woman who had a dream that I would have a better life than her. And I want to talk about reciprocal generosity. My mother never went anywhere. She and my sister, through the GI Bill, my sister worked in World War II, built a little room to our house, and she started a daycare center. My mother loved children. And she took the money from that daycare center and she started saving it. And her and my brother bought a little duplex, and she saved that money. So when my mother died 35 years ago, she left $150,000 for her children, which today would be $500,000. This immigrant woman never went anywhere, except she did go to see the Pope. She had to see the Pope. So all her money. Can you imagine that? Now people say spend your inheritance. No, my mother saved her money. And she said, you can spend it on education, or you can put down a down payment on a house. This immigrant woman figured out the strategy of how her offspring would survive, see? And when kids begin to hear those kind of stories of the sacrifice and the vision, and say, I became an educated woman because of my mother's dream. And so, last May, I had 3 of my nephews and nieces graduate from college at the same time. We have someone in my family with a PhD in nuclear physics. We have someone with a PhD in chemistry who heads up a department at a college. All 3 of my daughters have advanced degrees. One of them is a professor. This can happen in one lifetime. If you get those kids and you say, you can do this, and we're here to help you. We're here to make sure that the American dream, that the land of opportunity is open for everyone. And I'm opening that door for you.
Thank you.
So one more thing I will tell you all, that I had a sister who went into real estate, and when she died, she left 7 homes for immigrant families. I have committed, since my children have advanced degrees, and by the way, they're 50, so I'm not talking chiquititos, okay? That I am leaving my money for refugees and immigrants, and I'm kind of starting that movement. I'm not sure that the 1% are going to redistribute their wealth, but I'm asking those of us that are middle class that, to remember that we can set up trusts, that we can do scholarships, that we can educate the next generation. And like I said, I feel like I'm a really rich person, so I don't feel like I have to acquire a new home or things like that. I've lived in my same house 40 years, and all I can say is that, money can't buy you love. And so I really am starting this movement. I have 4 people now that are going to be leaving their wealth. Because our children are older. It's not like, they're 18 or 19 and they've already got furniture, and a lot of them have homes. So I would be thinking about that, about, having a scholarship in your name, Wayne, because people would be looking to you and following in your footsteps in that way.
Thank you so much for that. I definitely appreciate it. So now
the Wayne White Scholarship. You too can be great.
Dr. Bordas, you've given us so much to think about. This has been tremendous, tremendous, tremendous. I cannot tell you how excited I am. And by the way, I'm getting text messages and prompts from other people that are wondering how to get your book. And
yeah, well, actually, I got my publisher to give a 40% discount, and it's on the flyer that you got. It's Barrett Kohler, and I think it's Teacher 20 is the code, but it's on your flyer, and I'll be glad, if people want to get a hold of me, that's fine too. But it is a discount, and I would really appreciate it, because the more we can get the message out, the more we can create this critical mass, the more we can really build. And that's what keeps me up is, why am I so motivated? Because of you.
Thank you. Now the discount was only to January 31st. So if that could be extended.
No, we changed it to February 14th. I got it changed.
February 14th. Excellent.
February 14th. Yes.
That is excellent. Thank you so very much. And do you want to tell them what your website is while we're in the topic?
Yeah, I think they can go on to juanabordas.com. I don't have the book thing on there, but let me see if I can get my person to put up the book thing so that you could just go on the website. but it is on your flyer. I just wanted to end in the tradition of the Latino culture, which is a bendición. If people just want to wait for a minute. I would like to thank the Great Spirit for this time together, for the good work that each one is doing to uplift our people, to take care of our children, and to build a better future. We ask you to bless our work and to walk beside us. We thank you so much for all that we have been given, and we know that we are chosen to do this work, and we are grateful that we can be together today and to look for a brighter day in the future when we can be together in person. Amen.
Amén. Amén. Muchísimas gracias otra vez de corazón. ¿Eh?
Sí.
Thank you so much.
Keep up the good work.
Thank
Adios.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
In closing,
Yes, thank you so much.
A few people, because this was made possible through a collaboration, a partnership between the AFT and NYSUT. I want to thank President Rennie Weingarten from the AFT, Andy Palada from NYSUT, Dr. Melissa Saunders from AFT, Cesar Moreno Perez from AFT, Cheryl Tier from AFT, V. Peterson from AFT, and on the NYSUT team, Mark Scherer, Eloise Nauzet, James Morrison, and Brian Thomas. Thank you so much all for joining us. This will be available on demand on the NYSUT Social Justice webpage. So if you want to watch this program at your own leisure, it will be available to you on the Social Justice webpage. Thank you so much all and have a good evening. Bye everyone. Thank you.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Thank